All right, so the next one we're going to talked about the Macaulay. Let's move over to Hartzell. So we'll do the Hartzell. Hartzell prop. Let's see, which one we're going to do here. We'll just go with this one. So prop designs. Hartzell has two types, and it gets kind of confusing. And I don't like really the way they call it. Sometimes I think everything with props was designed to be confusing. One, the steel hub. The steel hub prop. And the compact. The contact prop. And I don't know, sometimes the easiest way is to forget what they're called there, but you can't. So the steel hub has no exposed operating mechanism, has no exposed operating mechanism. As where the compact, has exposed, there we go. I didn't mean to put no, I was thinking ahead, has exposed operating, and this one has no exposed operating mechanism.
Hey, Kevin, I have kind of a question for you. As we move towards the Hartzell props, out of the two, Hartzell and Macaulay, I mean, just on your privy, your preference, which ones do you find to be better propellers? Or I know like they're basically the same, like manufacturing quality wise, but if you were to choose one on your aircraft or like as an AMP,
I honestly have no opinion on this.
Hmm.
Yeah. But again, that's like asking, it's only because I don't have massive expertise. I never worked for a prop shop, but at the same thing, if you said, hey, would I rather have a Continental or Lycoming? And I was an expert on these two, I still have no opinion. Each one has its benefits and each one has its downsides. So, it just doesn't matter to me.
No.
It's almost like sometimes you just get what you get and don't have a fit. So they're all great products. But this is the best picture I could find to explain this. So here, A is the steel hub. A is the steel hub. And like I said, the steel hub has exposed parts. Can't really see them really well in this particular picture, but just keep in mind that's the steel. And the compact, like I said, the reason why I hate it, it's very fat. So I don't know where they get the compact. I'm sure somebody had some idea and they could tell me exactly what they meant by compact, but it's just the exposed stuff is the steel. And that's kind of what I go for. I go, okay, I can recognize the steel and everything else is therefore the compact. And I believe that most general aviation has moved all towards the compact, and that the steel is a pretty more or less obsolete in the general aviation world. But I believe that is still the main staple if you're looking at turbine type applications. So let me see here. So let me just go scroll through these here. Well, I was looking for a good picture, but there we go. It tells me I'm done with pictures. So if we can look at this one, it's a little difficult because it does have the big spinner on there, and you're trying to make heads or tails. Does this have exposed parts or not? It's even a little hard for me to tell because this looks like an exposed part here, but I don't think that's. I think this is more. It looks like a steel one to me because of this long nose. Let me see, get something definitive going here. Okay, so this one is definitely a compact because there's no external mechanisms. Same thing, just close up. And that's another compact. And that means it's the end of that particular prop. So let's talk about what we can see. Let me see. Oh, that's wrong with that. Okay. back over here. I think that was the first slide. There we go, first slide. Okay, so what do we got going on here? I almost don't love that picture, but we can see a couple things. One, there's a gigantic stinking spring in here. Two, it's got counterweights. Three, it's got heated boots on it, which we'll get into much later. But otherwise, that's a steal. That's a complicated picture there. Let's go to something just a little bit easier for you guys to look at. And I'll go to one more. It's a close up. There we go. Okay, so we've got a couple of things. One, counterweights and a big old spring. And it's got a Schrader valve. If you haven't heard that word before, Schrader valve is really what we call air fittings. And so because it's got an air fitting, that tells me that number one, it's got an air charge to it. Number two, it's got a spring. Number three, it's got counterweights. And four, we know we've got oil pressure somewhere. So because it has counterweights, I know that centrifugal twisting force makes it go to a, somebody help me out.
High blade angle.
High blade angle. Okay, so right before the break, I was talking about twins, and well, I was talking about feathering. You don't feather a single engine airplane. The reason why is because you're never, ever, under any circumstances that I can think of, going to want to shut down your engine on a single engine aircraft, unless, of course, you had a massive propeller failure and it was going to shake itself out of the aircraft and then screw up your weight and balance and cause you to back up down to the ground, which you wouldn't want. So I'm having a hard time coming up with any other circumstance where you'd ever shut down and worry about a single engine plane. So in single engine, you pretty much just fly them until they don't fly anymore. If you lost oil pressure, don't care, keep the power on, and you're gonna use every ounce of whatever's left of that engine. If you have a twin, you have more options available to you, or multi-engine, I should say, not just twin, but you have that option available. If something's going wrong with one of your engines and you want to shut it down for a safety reason, and you're thinking, and it works for you, and within the parameters say, hey, that engine, I've got oil pressure problems, it's not working right, it's got one problem or another, I'm just going to shut it down, we're going to go on the other engine. You have that option, which is why there's two. And when you do that, you're going to want to feather the prop. It's critical that you feather the prop. There are a couple of aircraft out there that don't have feathering props as a twin. Very, very few and far between. In fact, there's a twin Aeronca out there that actually uses O200s, and they don't even have constant speed props on them, which is funny. But anyway, so we have to think about this. In the Macaulay, we'll go back one to the Macaulay. What made it go to a high blade angle? High blade angle towards feather. We'll go all the way to the beginning picture. There we go. Well, what made this one
oil,
go
wasn't it?
high blade
Oil
angle?
bleeding off.
What made it go to oil bleeding
pressure.
off? Centrifugal twisting force is our main force without oil. Centrifugal twisting force will make it go to
low blade angle because there's no counterweight.
low blade angle. So in this particular propeller, if I lose oil, it's going to go to high RPM, low blade angle, right?
Right.
Yes.
Opposite of feather. Now, if I'm flying around in a twin and I lose oil pressure, what do I not want to have happen?
This.
Windmilling.
Windmilling.
Yeah. So if I lose oil pressure, my engine goes away, I have a catastrophic failure, an oil line breaks, something happens, oil spills all over the place, I've got to shut down my engine. I want to be able to feather my prop. And what does it take to feather this one? If it did feather, which it doesn't, would be oil pressure. So that is really bad. So that's why on any sort of feathering propeller, you're going to find you're going to find counterweights, because so when I lose oil pressure drains off. These counterweights are going to take it all the way to feather. And that's what they're there to do. And that's why on a twin or any sort of feathering propeller, you will always, with some exceptions, find counterweights. I think there's one prop that uses spring and oil pressure alone without counterweights. So you can do it that way, but you have to fight centrifugal twisting force to do it. So this way, centrifugal twisting force is always going to drive it towards feather. So it takes oil pressure to keep it out of feather, if you want to look at it that way. So if I lose oil pressure, it's automatically going to go all the way to feather because there's nothing else to countermind it. So that's why you're always going to find counterweights on a twin, and that's why it's reversed. Okay, so why then does a single not have counterweights? You know, is it some sort of, well, if we lose oil pressure, we want it to always go this way or that way? I don't think so. I think it's just a matter of complexity. Why add weight if you don't need it? If you don't need counterweights and they weigh something, just get rid of them, right? Just makes things more simplistic, and you just reverse the governor pilot valve to do something different, and you're fine. So just keep things simple. So, all right. So what kind of notes can we put about the Hartzell? We have the two types there. Okay. So the steel hub, we'll talk about the steel hub. Okay. So it comes in both counterweight and non-counterweight versions. And of course, counterweights. I don't know, actually, I'm not going to take a bunch of your time to write all this because it's being redundant. So what I was going to write is the counterweights uses oil pressure to decrease blade angle, and non-counterweight uses oil pressure to increase blade angle. So nothing's changed. Nothing has changed. I'm going to write one more time actually. But I'll write it a little bit different. I will put counterweights, a counterweight prop uses centrifugal twisting force to move blade to high pitch / feather. And non-counterweight prop, PROP, uses centrifugal twisting force to move blade to low pitch. Okay, that's just, for the most part, not going to change. So to keep that in mind, we don't have to keep writing it over and over, and then you won't complain to me that your fingers hurt, and then I won't get a bill from you going to the finger chiropractor. So anytime we have a feathering, so feathering prop, we'll put this here, so if it is a feathering prop, it will usually, there are some exceptions, have counterweights. Okay, so let's see, the compact hub. Anything I need to, it's the more modern style. Yeah, I'll just put this one. Uses an aluminum hub. Okay, here's where we need to get into some nitty gritty here though. So the design factor, you should always be able to look at the design factor and just say, okay, counterweights, this thing must be feathering. No counterweights, it's not feathering. You go up to a twin and you don't see a counterweight, I'm gonna start asking some questions here. Why does this thing not have counterweights? What's going on? What makes it go to feather then if I lose oil pressure? Because that's always the thing you want to concern yourself with. But maintenance. As far as props go, like if I had to sum up what it is you need to know or what I want to know about working on a prop, really it's going to come down to these maintenance things. So number one, if I've got a McCauley, I know that I've got to be cautious and look for oil leakage. And I know that there's not much else I can do to this prop as far as lubrication goes. This doesn't get lubricated, but I see any red dye, that's a big deal. It's coming off right now. Not another flight, not a, hey, let's watch this, let's wipe it. I see red dye, it's game over for that prop. It's going to the prop shop and find out why. You can argue that it's probably a seal, but every time I have, every story I have heard about a prop shop getting a McCauley because somebody said it had a bad seal, they also found a crack. And so we talked about the centrifugal force on these props, and it's tremendous, and you don't need it flying apart. All right, so that's McCauley. Hartzell needs lubricant, and it's got these grease fittings. And if there was one thing you had to know about the grease fittings, I would say this: don't touch it unless you're 100% sure that you know exactly what you're doing. I would say make sure 110%, but that just means I'm bad with math, and I don't want to be labeled as that. So make sure you know what you're doing, because these need to be lubricated, but it is so easy to mess up this lubrication. So that's one of the things on the Hartzells that you need to know. So compact props, the compact prop needs greasing. And I'm going to tell you, the greasing requirements, they change, and they've changed since I've been in the field. And so I'm really reluctant to tell you anything other than follow the manual. Follow the manual. Or call a prop shop. That's what they're there for. You get a good relationship with a prop shop, they'll help you out. But the way it was, you had to remove one of the grease fittings. Remove one of the grease fittings. Grease fittings. Also called a Zerk fitting. I think it's spelled Z-E-R-K, Zerk. Like the emperor. No, that's Zerg. You remove one of them, and then you add grease to the other. So what they say is it's preferable to apply grease to the fitting located nearest the leading edge of the blade on the tractor, and then fill that one. I think at one point, I don't even remember if it was true or it's just what people were doing. They were removing a greaser and then filling it until you got fresh grease coming out of the hole. So let me see if I can find a good picture here of these grease fittings. I don't know if I've got one. Sometimes these photos are just hard to really get the right thing. Oh, well, we got that one. So from current slide. So I'll go back here. Let's back up a little bit. Okay, right there. So there's the grease fitting. And there's an opposite grease fitting. So we'll have one here, one over here, and one over there. So there's gonna be 4 of them. And so you're gonna grease 2 of them. So you wanna pull out, let me see, leave in the one that is located nearest the leading edge and pull out the other one. And then you would put grease in the fitting and then screw the other one back. So it looks like there's 4 places to put grease, but there's really only 2, because 2 of them are just really caps. And I think I've got a video that actually shows you exactly how to do it, where you pull out the greaser, you put in a little bit of safety wire to make sure it's all cleaned out, you don't have any problems. And then you add 4 ounces of grease to it, and then you're done. You don't wait for it to come out the other end, but that's, in the manual. So back to here. So remove one of the grease fittings, actually going to be on one side. Let me see. Apply grease to leading edge fitting. And let me see, and that's on a tractor style. If it's a non-tractor style, like the rear prop on a Skymaster, then you can do it different. So use the grease listed on the sticker. There's almost always a sticker on the hub. It tells you exactly what grease you should use.
We can't just run down to Zach's store and get some wheel bearing and chassis grease.
You absolutely can. Just don't tell anybody you did that, and then make sure that you have your prop shop standing by to overhaul the prop.
How about there's no sticker?
So I have a kind of a question, Kevin. On a lot,
You don't have to say that every time, but it's okay.
On the props that Ivan and when I was working there, they would have like these little nubs that would come out, and we'd have a grease gun labeled prop grease only.
Right.
Like these little nubs that would stick out, and they have caps, and you could take off the cap, and then he would stand next to me, and you'd go, you want to go 4 pumps? Because I
Yes.
guess, and then pull it off. Are those the same fittings? Because we didn't ever safety wire them or anything. They would just stick out a little bit. on that
Right.
one.
Do you remove the opposite side, or you just do you lubricate all four of them?
I think he would go off and then remove the other one.
That's
Or
what I'm
would-
saying. The little nub is called a grease zerk, or the grease fitting. So that's what I'm talking about. So you're going to remove the opposite side, put in 4 pumps because you get 1 ounce per pump, and then you're done.
Okay, and so then okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I was
That's
always wondering what that was, like what that would go to.
Yeah. Let me see if I can find a nice picture here.
I have bad dreams about Zerk fittings.
Let me see. Hartzell prop grease fittings. Let's pull this over here and see. Oh,
They're
there you go.
basically
That's
like-
what they look like, right?
They're basically just one-way valves.
They really are. It's just got a little spring and a little
That's
ball
a little
inside
bit.
there. So here you go. Let's see. There's some grease fittings there. So that's what they look like. I like this one. There you go. You can see that one there. That one. And then there's, see you have the opposite side. So here's the trailing edge. Let's see. And there, did I do it right? No, moneyspace.com. Let me see. Open and new tab. There we go. We'll do that. Look at this. There we go. Now my mic's in the way. I can't see it. Okay. So there's one fitting. There's the other. But this one's been capped. But sometimes you'll see this right here and right here. And on the opposite side, you'll see the same thing. So what I'm guessing on this one is because I said you always take out one side and you grease the leading edge. Well, guess what? This is the leading edge here because it's the opposite. So there's leading edge, trailing edge. This is leading edge. It's trailing edge over there because that's how it works. And so this is the one you're going to pull out, and this is the one you're going to grease. And then on the opposite side, you're doing the same thing. So actually, this goes to this side, and this one and this one are the opposites. These aren't the opposites. So you're going to grease the side on the leading edge and take out the one on the trailing edge, which is over here. And you're going to put 4 pumps in. And 4 pumps is about 4 ounces. Ooh, look at that. Those bastard, what do you call them? Nuts that are hard to get to. The safety wire wrapped up in them. So, but they got nice little caps on there.
Is that the compact style?
Yes, absolutely. Because it is definitely not the steel hub. Let me see if we got a good picture. Hartzell. So steel hub prop images. There we go. That's it. Well, that didn't help. But see all the external mechanisms?
You can always hit Control plus to zoom in, Kev.
Control plus.
Plus.
Oh, well, I could have done that. I could also hit Control mouse wheel. Woo. But thank you. The other one had a magnifying glass. All right, so that's your compact. Here's another picture. Oh, I like that picture. That's a really good one. So you can see how the external mechanism right here is what I'm talking about. So this is, you're gonna find this on a PT6 these days. So turbine engines, that's what they're gonna be using still to this day. So I believe that's what, this is the same picture I have. So that's the compact because you can see the rods coming through here. So
What is
I'm
it
sorry,
showing
steel.
in the one that says over greased Hartzell?
Is it here?
Right below the
Oh.
one, the cutaway.
Oh, over greased Hartzell. It's Facebook too. Yikes. Oh, that's excellent. Well, this blade was brought into shop because it would not change pitch. As the cylinder is being removed, it became apparent that the reason the propeller would not change pitch is due to hydraulic lock. Love that. Oh my goodness. Oh, this is excellent stuff.
A little bit over 4 pumps.
I think, yeah. Yeah, here's where the fittings go right there. Dang. Well, this is just a grease leak. Or is it leaking because they forced it out? I think I actually had a mechanic tell me that time. It's like, oh, you just grease it till a little bit comes out over here. Oh, no, don't do that. Oh, that's ugly. Oh, there we go. So, all right, good pictures. All right, so use the right grease. Be careful with that grease. What else do I got here? Let's see, blade adjustment. Steel hub props can have the low pitch adjusted by adjusting the blade clamps. I'm not going to get into that for you guys. Compact, yep. So we'll move on here. So 5. We're going to talk about feathering props then. Not that some of those weren't feathering. In fact, we can go over to here and go back to where we were. Just finish that out. So, all right. So we have the steel and the compact. That is because of the change rod right here. You can tell that it's steel hub. And it's still, everything works about the same. No big surprises. And I got to get into the air pressure here. I'm sure I do. Okay. I just kind of go back and forth. All right. So the Hartzell steel hub prop is counterweighted. Okay. So I got, obviously I talked about a non-counterweighted version. So it both comes in both. So non-counterweighted version, centrifugal twisting force. I got to get my pictures better. My pictures aren't lining up with what I'm talking about. So if you have a steel hub without counterweights, then it's centrifugal twisting force to low. If you have a compact without counterweights, centrifugal twisting force to low. We know that everything is pretty much the same. All right. Talk about feathering props, which really matches the pictures that I just looked at more than anything. All right, feathering props. Purpose. All right, so multi-engine aircraft require feathering props. To reduce drag. Reduce drag should the aircraft lose that engine. We'll say you lose that engine. So you lose one engine. So feathering a prop means to rotate the prop, rotate the prop 90 degrees. That is blade directly into the wind, in order to stop the engine from windmilling, in order to stop the prop and engine from windmilling. What the hell am I going to write there? Fuel? No. How about very few aircraft? Nope. I want to say very few single engine aircraft. Very few single engine aircraft have a feathering prop. Very few. In fact, I think it's only just a couple of ag planes, spraying planes, crop dusters have something like that with the PT6 on it. So I believe they're just using the Hartzell steel blade, which already came with counterweights. So they just left them on there. So 5, note that in the event of an engine failure, failure, or loss of oil, the prop needs to feather. The prop needs to feather without the use of engine oil, without the use of engine oil. Well, I'll just say pressure from governor. Press, P-R-E, press. Wow, write it all out, pressure. P-R-E, it says oil pressure from the governor. So in other words, you just lost all your oil pressure and you want to shut the engine down and feather the prop. The last thing you want to say is, well, should have thought about that before I lost all my oil pressure. So the only way to solve that then is to take off and feather your engine while you still have everything used there, right? So that doesn't make any sense. 1, 2, 3, 4. Where the heck was I?
If you lost an engine and it was windmilling, would there be enough RPM to continue to lubricate everything off the engine-driven pump, or would it just be too low of an RPM for adequate lubrication?
Nope. No, it would, because think about it, the prop is moving at the same speed then as the crankshaft. And so if you lost, let's say you lost all your ignition system. And so now the thing is sitting there windmilling, but you just don't have spark. So because you don't have spark, you don't have ignition, because you have ignition, you have no power, but it's running. The rest of the engine doesn't know that. So everything is going to work, except you won't get power out of the cylinders. So it means the oil pump's going to go and it will lubricate the engine. The governor's going to work and it's going to be trying to go over speed, under speed. The fuel system is going to be working because the pumps, the pistons are going and the air is coming through and it's going to be injecting fuel. So absolutely everything will continue to work, except you won't have any power.
Barring that wasn't what failed in the first place.
Well, that's why I said ignition system. But let's take the example that a cylinder failed. I mean, a catastrophic cylinder failure where you actually lost a piece of the cylinder and part of the piston. And so you have a rod that came through the side of the case. It's flinging all over the place. I've actually heard stories of people running an engine that way and not doing too bad. It ran rough, wondered why. But if you do realize that and pieces are coming out of the cowling and you want to shut it down, well, you want to be able to shut it down without oil pressure. And so that's the whole point there. So, all right, let's look at the Macaulay feathering prop. So Macaulay, M-C-C-A-U-L-E-Y, Macaulay, the Macaulay feathering. Macaulay feathering. So it's going to be very similar to the non-feathering, non-feathering model. But guess what the difference is?
Feather.
Counterweights.
But uses counterweights and spring pressure. And spring pressure to increase blade angle. As before, the other Macaulay had no counterweights, and so it used centrifugal twisting force and the spring to go to a low blade angle. This reverses it, centrifugal twisting force and spring pressure to increase the blade angle, and then, of course, oil to decrease. So you can identify them because it also, in addition to the counterweights, also has a longer piston to accommodate longer blade travel. To accommodate longer blade travel. Because the travel is really limited by the size of the piston. Or not the size of the piston, the length of it. I don't have a picture of anything like that. I'm very sorry about that. Fail. me see what's going on here. Let me see if we can get rid of this one. So what I'm saying is right here, this is a real shorty right there. So if this were on a feathering prop, this dome, excuse me, comes way up. It's much, much longer because the travel on these blades is really very small. But when you go feather, that's a lot of travel. So it's going to be much, much longer. Let me see. All right, so then I will say this, which is getting a little redundant, but propeller is counterweighted, prop is counterweighted. Counterweighted and spring loaded, loaded to feather, if oil pressure is lost, which is good and bad. If you are flying along and something happens to your aircraft and you suddenly have a complete and total loss of engine oil pressure, the prop is automatically going to feather out on you. And that's something that I would want, except for maybe two scenarios. One went during takeoff, and it depends. And I don't want it to do that when I shut the aircraft down. Because I remember I told you that it is really difficult to start these aircraft if the prop is feathered. It's a tremendous amount of air load with the propeller, like an oar, some sort of blade just kind of going through the air like that. It's so much wind resistance that it's really hard on the starter, burns up starters. So you couldn't actually have a starter that's going to have much of a life if every time you went to start one of these twins, if the blades are in feather. So you have to prevent it from going into feather when you shut down. So the prop has to know whether you're shutting down because you have a problem or because you're shutting down because you're just shutting down to go get a hamburger. And so the way they do it, the way the props do it, is that it has a feathering lock in it. And there's different designs of feathering locks that have gone through kind of an evolution. But basically what it is when you bring it has locks inside that work off of a centrifugal force and spring pressure. And so the springs, well, how do I say this? Okay, so when you bring your engine down to idle, because you're going to shut it down, so that'll be the normal procedure. I'm going to shut it down on the ground to go get my hamburger. I'm going to bring my engines down to an idle, and then I'm going to pull the idle mix and turn it off and then hit the key. Well, down there at that low RPM in your idle range, these feathering locks engage and keep the prop from going into feather. And so then when I shut it down at that point, these locks are engaged and it won't let it go to feather. But in flight, you're flying along, and what happens is, so you go up to altitude or you're flying along, one of the things that you do is you don't have the prop in low pitch, high RPM. You're actually flying it around with the prop pulled back a little bit, so it's in a much higher pitch. So that's the normal spot for flying around. So number one, you take off and you have high RPM. So you hit the high RPM, the locks come disengaged. The locks come disengaged because of centrifugal force, which allows the prop to go through its whole range of motion. So then you pull the blue knob back a little bit, and then the blades are going to go into a little bit higher pitch. And now the blades themselves, the locking mechanism, cannot be engaged because of the way it's designed. Those little centrifugal locks can try and go in, but have nothing to lock onto anymore because that is moved on with the blade. So once you're in this mid-range or out of low pitch, then the prop has no locking mechanism. And so once you're in that spot, you lose oil pressure, boom, it's just going to go all the way to its feather position. Even if you pulled it back to an idle at that point, wouldn't matter because yeah, it's going to slow down, but it's too far. It's too far past its blade locks. I don't think I have a picture because of the way they work. No, it's really, really difficult to even find pictures and stuff for this. You just kind of have to know how they work and understand it. And I'm sorry, I don't have anything. looking over here to see if I have anything, and no, I do not. And even these photos don't, they don't have it. You can't see it in any of these photos. No. And the ones we have, the cutaways we do have in the hangar, they are so complicated. We have really old ones that they're superseded, and there's not even data on it. To figure them out is almost mind-boggling. So let me see. I will write this though. To prevent feathering, and maybe you didn't understand half of what I was just talking about, how it works, but if you can understand what I'm going to write here, you're going to be fine. To prevent feathering, F-E-A-T-H-E-R-I, prevent feathering during shutdown, during, I'll say normal shutdown, normal shutdown. A centrifugal latch is used. A centrifugal latch is used. Latch is used. This prevents excessive loads on starter. And under about 900 RPM, the latch engages, or a latch, the latch engages, that prevents prop from feathering. And so again, the latches only engage and work, like I say, under two situations. One, it's got to be under 900 RPM, and two, the blade has to be in high RPM, low pitch. And at that point, the blade, if you can think about it this way, the blade comes around, and let's just say it doesn't really work this way. Well, it kind of does. It brings around a slot where the feathering latch can engage. All right, and then at over 900 RPM, the latch pins would disengage because the centrifugal force is going to pull them out. And then the prop is going to rotate and go into a higher blade angle because you're using it. And then if you were to bring it back to idle, the latch pins miss their hole and they can't latch it. So you can go right into feather. It misses them. So if you're watching the video when I did that, that's probably about the best explanation I can give you, because that's how they work.
But what happens if you're like on takeoff and you're not under 900, but it's going to begin to feather? And you're losing.
Well, if you're on takeoff and you're not up to 900, then you're not taking off. You're idling on the runway.
Well, yeah, but you said it latches under 900, right? So it won't, I mean, it will only feather if it's above 900.
Yeah. Well, actually, if you're in a twin, and you're talking about losing an engine on takeoff,
yeah,
there's actually a switch in the cockpit for a lot of airplanes. It's auto feather. It automatically feathers them. You want it to feather.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing. So you're going to be over 900 RPM, and you're also going to have the governors engaged, and it's probably not going to be on its low pitch stops. It's going to be a little bit beyond that, which means that the feathering latches aren't going to find it. They're not going to hit the hole.
Yeah.
So it's going to feather. All right. But so how do you feather a prop? So you're flying along and you want to feather it. Well, how do you do it? You can't just drain all the oil out and say, well, it'll feather as soon as I run out of oil. Well, that's true, but you don't want to fly around doing that. You got a problem. You want to shut it down. So governor. So what does the governor look like? The governor. All right. So to feather, comma, the governor incorporates a lift rod. connected to the speeder spring. Connected to the speeder spring. Steven, is your microphone still on? Don't make me go look. All right, so what happens is you have the blue knob. And of course, the blue knob, as we keep saying, is high RPM, low RPM, high RPM, low RPM. Well, if you want to go to feather, you pull it back to low RPM, which, by the way, is going to be a high pitch angle towards feather anyway. And then there's a detent, and you go past the detent. There's a gate or something where you kind of have to go around it and back down, so you can't inadvertently throw it into feather while you're just trying to go into low RPM. And what it does is when you go into that position, there is a cam that reaches over and it grabs onto that pilot valve that is going up and down inside of the governor that says underspeed, overspeed, underspeed, overspeed. It literally just grabs it and yanks it and pulls it up and forces all the oil from the prop to drain off. And so the governor flyweights can spin around all they want. It can say underspeed or overspeed with the flyweights. It doesn't make a bit of difference because you physically just grabbed the pilot valve and yanked it up, draining off all the oil from the prop, which is how it works. So you just drain all the oil off. So, so the lift rod mechanically lifts the pilot valve, when the cockpit control is moved to the feather position, All right, so you're flying along, and as you would do, and if you're you put an engine away, well, maybe you're doing flight training, and you that's part of it, and so you feather the prop, put the engine away, fly around on one for a while, and it's time to, it's Miller time, so you got to unfeather this thing. Well, how do you unfeather it? Well, it depends on the system. So some systems have mechanisms to defeather it, and we'll talk about those when we come back from break a little bit more, but they use an accumulator, which stores up a charge of oil. So you take the blue knob and you go out of feather and bring it up into the normal position. It drops the pilot valve back down to normal operating range. But of course, the engine's not running, so it's going to say, hey, by the way, we're in an underspeed and we got to flatten these blades out. And so that's a good thing because that's what you want to do, flatten them out. And so when it does that, it opens up a valve, and this charge of oil, because remember, the engine's not running, there is no oil pressure. This charge of oil that's been stored comes flooding into the prop, takes the prop from feather, brings it into a mid-range, and as soon as the wind hits it, it starts windmilling. Well, when it starts windmilling, then everything starts working. The oil pump starts working, and since the oil pump is working and the governor's working, now you've got oil pressure and a working propeller, and all you have to do is bring up your mixture, and you should have, and make sure your mags are still on. You're gonna have fuel spark, and boom, there you go. Engine's running, everything's back to normal, and just realign the manifold and prop where you want it, and you're back to business. Now, if you don't have, and I know it's 520, if you don't have an accumulator or a way to bring it out, then you're kind of stuck, and you have to use the starter to do it, which, like I said, you can do it. I've started many of airplanes on the ground with the accumulator wasn't charged. Started the 310, our 310 at school. Last time somebody shut it down, well, not the last time before the last, they put it in feather and shut it down in feather. And so the blades are all feathered out, and I had to start it. And so, yeah, you just start it in feather, and it's hard on the engine, but once you get it started and you get oil pressure built up, it brings it right into low pitch and everything's fine. And then the locks engage. So, all right. Kevin's probably got a pee by now. So we'll come back.